Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, the host of the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today comes from uh, one of the episodes from the first year of the Eddy Network podcast, 2023. His name is John Morley. He's a consultant and coach in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And he's a very interesting fellow, and we got introduced to one another. And it is John who was the first to describe what I'm doing here with the podcast as an unscripted conversation. So you're going to hear my conversation with John Morley today, and I know you're going to find it interesting. It's always it's always inspiring, but also intellectually challenging. And enjoy our conversation. Thank you for being with us today. Bye bye. Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is John Morley, and I'm glad that John is here. We've had numerous conversations, and we enjoy talking with one another. We share a lot of the same ideas, and I'm glad you're going to get to meet him today because I hope you will find out some things some things of interest to you that I think will be beneficial. So, welcome, John, and tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for having me on. I love our conversations because I'll learn something every time, and we get to throw around some different ideas and see what they look like when we turn them around. I ooh, I came out of a long corporate career, mostly in the middle, and found that things I was good at doing but used to complain about, if I stopped complaining about them, that maybe they were actually little advantages. So things like, not having a budget, or never having what seemed like enough headcount, or having been given goals that looked like they were going to be really, really difficult to achieve, not just stretch goals, but like really difficult. And then finding that actually you can get them done. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is that a lot of the ways that we can get remarkable things done don't show up on job postings or in training courses at work. And so you quickly discover that you got to be a continuous learner, and then that people are amazing for the most part. They want to help. So I sat back about 2 years ago and looked at that and said, I've had enough experience of this to be able to probably put it together and maybe help others look at how they can solve big, tricky challenges when they're in the middle. So that's largely what I do today, is try to help particularly middle managers sort of understand how they try and resolve some seemingly impossible challenges, and maybe help leaders understand that that frozen middle isn't frozen. It's just doesn't have enough knowledge. And so we can help. And I spend a lot of my time learning from people like yourself and others, because you got to keep learning. Every day is school day. So that's me in a nutshell.
Very true. That idea of the middle, that person in the middle, is such a compelling question. I've had lots of conversations, and it's interesting to talk to regional managers of national or global companies, because they're being squeezed between headquarters and the local operations, and they have there's no way that they can actually succeed, because the conception of the company by headquarters and the conception of the company by the retail operations are not the same at all. I mean, they're totally different, and the person in the middle has to play both ends against the middle.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when I moved out to where I am right now, first in California, I got a call from my boss who was on the East Coast, and he was great, one of the best people I ever worked for. But one of the things he said to me was, he said, "Don't go native." and I very quickly looked around and said, the only way I'm going to succeed here is by going native. So, it's that respect for what we were being asked to do. And and listening to how we were being asked to do it, but understanding, yeah, we got to make our own decisions about how we do it, because what he sees and what we see are not the same.
Why don't you describe for us, and I'm particularly thinking about people who may not be in a corporate environment, what it means to be a middle manager. Let's just use that terminology. A middle manager in a corporation where you have executives above you and you have people that work for you or your direct reports below you, and you're in this band of structure in the organization. Let's describe a little bit about what that's like and what is the what is the purpose of that level of structure within a corporation?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a yes, I'm happy to do so, and I'm trying to strip away much of the well, let's say this. I'll try and be objective about it first before I get sort of heavily subjective about it.
I mean, you telling your story, I think is illustrative of what this is about too. So either way
Yeah.
is fine. It's all fine. It's all fine.
Well, I think when you look at I look at organizations and loosely say there's sort of those three layers. There's the leadership layer, which sets the strategy uh, and the direction for the organization. Um, and then there's a layer which I'll typically call the bottom, which is where we have people who are using their skills and competences to actually get work done. Um, and then there's that layer in the middle that takes those strategies and directions and converts them into programs of work. And for the most part, they will have come up from having worked in that organization. So they have, cultural knowledge, contextual knowledge.
Mhm.
They'll have a good network of people. Um, and if I give an example of, like, for instance, salespeople, if they've been really good salespeople with that set of skills, oftentimes they're actually given a sales management role. Um, and there's an assumption made right there that because they were good at selling, they'll be good at managing. But they're two completely different skill sets. So there you start to see some of the challenges that happen in the middle, is that people who come up through promotion sometimes end up in a place that they don't have the relevant skill or competence. And then you get a lot of things like anxiety and frustration and fear. And some people have that way about them that they're happy to learn and share their vulnerability with their teams. And that makes for a pretty positive work environment typically. And others land in a situation like that and feel the pressure and decide that they need to control. And that leads to a certain type. So I sort of tend to see the middle as being that layer of conversion between here's the aspiration of the organization and here's how we're going to get it done. And you all in the middle are going to be the
So,
connective tissue.
so what are the leadership skills that are needed when you're in that role?
I think that's a great question.
I mean,
And
let me fill that in a little bit
yeah,
because obviously you're responding to the senior level of the company. You're doing their bidding. You know, they're directing responsibility to you, and then you have to implement the plan through all these people. But that's where leadership really comes to the fore, and so they have to um, respect you for one. They have to say, okay, this is what's before us. Let's go do that. But how do you set that up? Because those are leadership qualities, leadership skills that middle managers need.
I love that you're asking that question. I'll come around to it. I'm going to say, first of all, is that middle management is leadership. And certainly my experience of being a middle manager in several large organizations is that it's not perceived as leadership, and therefore no investment is made in leadership. So if you get a good leader at the middle, I think that's just dumb luck.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree. Yes.
That doesn't mean that I think there are phenomenal people, and some people show up and figure it out for themselves and they learn. And there's a lot of great methods and tools, and the one that comes to mind, for instance, is design thinking, that helps somebody who wants to be inclusive and figure out how to get the best out of a situation to go do that. But if you're unfortunate enough not to be aware or come into contact with some of those things, or just have that personality that allows you to actually see that power, you're going to have a tough role as a middle manager, and the people who you're managing are going to have a tough role working for you. And so I think there's a bit of kind of blind luck that comes into it at times. I do think, however, and I love your perspective on this, Ed, because you've studied these kind of things for a long time. I think each of us innately has a natural ability to bring people along. And sometimes, and I'm picking my words carefully, and I might get them wrong, but it's having that trust in yourself, to seek. Like, I'll give you an example. I remember when I came out to take up the role that moved me out here to California, I came in on top of an existing manager. And very quickly, there is, am I going to upset this person, or can I make them feel like I'm here to help them? And I was fortunate enough to realize that I would never have the knowledge that this person had. And that if we were going to succeed, it was by enabling this person even more. And so I was able to go to them and sit down and say, what do you know? What should we be doing? Because I know what I've been told that we should know what we should be doing. So how do we connect the two? And we had a great run. But again, I think that's a little bit of a mindset. Are you fortunate enough to know that that's kind of how you can succeed, or are you carrying the weight of, I've got to go in and show people what's what? And I think innately as human beings, we all have that ability to bring people with us. It's whether you've been given that room and space and time for yourself to appreciate that. How does that sit? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, I describe. I came to begin to describe the layers of an organization in terms of facilitation. So the senior level role, in addition to everything else, is to facilitate the leadership of the entire company. And the middle manager's role is to facilitate the leadership of their direct reports, people that work for them. And if those people are like sub middle managers, the people that work for them. But so you have to have this idea that from the bottom up, there's a set of leadership skills and leadership values or leadership perspective that is being developed in these people that then permeates, rises up through the system to the senior level. And that's the way I have come to see it. Now, I came to see it because I saw it missing. I was thinking, why is this? Why are these people at the bottom of the structure of this organization so talented and so good, but this organization is not functioning well? Why is that? I'm asking that kind of question, and it's because people down here are not getting the kind of support that they need or the training that they needed. And that was because of a perception that they weren't leaders, that they were just to do work, that's what they were there to do.
There's a button here that we can press very easily at this moment, and I love it. And I'm gonna say it, and you can decide whether you want to go into it or not.
I want to. I can tell already.
You touched on something there that I've become very fascinated by, and it's this idea of personal freedom, and that is that we all have the ability to be free. And I view freedom as being sort of the agent of your own experience. No matter where you are in an organization, you have choice. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're good choices or that they have positive outcomes at the end of them. But you are free. And when you make a choice, you are accountable to that choice. And I think some of the best leaders I've ever worked for are people who make an informed choice and are accountable for it. And they come to the people who work for them and they say, this is the choice we're going to be working towards. and sort of, let me have it. Tell me what you think, and I'm prepared to listen, because at the end of the day, my job as a leader is to make a decision. Um, and
There's, in that sense, I would call that mutual accountability. So you're allowing yourself to be placed into a relationship where you are accountable to the people that work for you.
yeah,
And that's a tough thing to accept, because we're used to everybody being a boss, not not a co-facilitator of leadership and impact.
I bring this up right now because before we got started, we were talking about machine learning and artificial
Yeah,
intelligence,
yeah,
all these
yeah.
things, and that they're not any more intelligent. There's no intelligence in machine learning beyond what it's been told to go and learn and what data it's consumed. But it moves at such a pace that we actually have to be to participate in it and not be controlled by it. We actually have to be, into things like continuous learning and awareness, and actually sort of starting to look at those things. You talk about the mutual accountability, which is to be able to say that if I want to retain that agency, my freedom, it is interdependent. It is not independent. I cannot go out on the reservation on my own and shout at the sky and go, I am free, because you are there in that moment because there's nothing around you. But we live in a world where there's stuff around us that we interact with. And so for me, these themes of, I love that what you raised about the mutual accountability in an interdependent world.
Mhm.
That's where our definitions of freedom and agency are right now. And so how ready are we for those things? And I know this is veering off your topic of, so to an extent, explicitly veering off middle management, but I think this is where you see really people who are really good in the middle are people who can hold that mutual accountability in place. I think that's the
Are
key
they
thing.
able to see things that nobody else sees?
Oh, absolutely. Uh, I love that you say see. I'm borrowing from some of my design, thinking, learning along the way. Um, there's a great company out of Pittsburgh called Luma, and they look at design thinking and they say there's three phases to it. There's observing, understanding, and making. And before you try to understand and make, you got to observe. And I think middle management, people who succeed, are good at observing. Um, they're good at partnering around understanding, and then they're good at partnering around making. But I think you have to be able to see, because you're in that sense where you can see where all the strategy is if you know how to look at it, and you can see where all the capacity is if you're good at looking at it.
So what do you think are the preconditions for being able to observe within a kind of a company context? I mean, you have to be. I mean, you just don't start from, oh, I'm going to go observe. No, you've got, there's something
Yeah,
that exists before that puts you in the position where you can observe. What do you think those things are?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think there's two there's two layers of that. One is,
Yeah.
well, I can tell you a story which explains it, which in my case it was being given a management role and a goal, and absolutely not having the resources to hit the goal. Um, and so having to consider, okay, well, if I had those resources, how would I go about it? And you get a sort of an audit of all the things you would need to hit that goal, and then look around and says, okay, what other team or group actually has those things or those people, and can I borrow them? So that was kind of one way of looking at it from a story perspective. Um, the other one is, and it seems like counterintuitive, is to slow down and smell the roses a little bit before jumping straight into action. And this is a hard thing to do, but can you sit back and just give yourself the luxury of just watching what's already there? And again, something you and I have talked about is that idea of, can we sense the system that's there
Yeah.
before we try and do something about it? And this is a piece I learned from you, right? Is to sense it first. because it might surprise you, and there might be far more of it there, and it just what it really requires is you to come in and help orchestrate it, rather than diving into here's what we're going to do. Um,
Yeah. I think that I'm going to go out on a limb in what I'm about to say, that you could be the least trained person on the planet. And if you have some modicum of skill at observing and identifying what's going on, you're going to be okay.
so,
When I started my consulting practice in 1995, I had never been a consultant. I didn't have a program. I'd never run a business. I didn't know anything other than I knew how to talk to people. And I knew how to talk to people in such a way that they talked about their problems.
Hmm.
As my son, who's now older, much older, he was 10 at the time. He when asked, "So what does your father do?" He says, "Dad talks to people who are having problems, offers to fix them." And that has turned out to be an accurate statement. But what I didn't know that I was seeing was patterns. So being able to see a pattern, something that's repeated over and over again, and then seeing it in a small business and in a corporate business, that same pattern exists. There's a spectrum there. All of a sudden, that becomes a pattern that you can bank on. You can take with
Yeah.
you wherever you go.
I love that, and we've talked about that being sort of timeless and unconditional and universal.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a There's two things coming to mind for me. One is I'm gonna say this because this is my sweet spot, and so it suits me absolutely
Good.
self-serving to say
I
this is,
like
hey,
that.
guess what? Maybe observation, to your point, is the most critical point or skill set for a middle manager. It may well be, because you rarely have the resources you need to get the thing done. And so that may be. I want to give you an example that came to light for me very recently that of what you just said. Was we were doing work with a company, and I should just front end this. It's in my mind, when I look at work that's being done, I see layers. And so if you think of like a store, there's the person at the front of the store who greets the customer walking in. There's the person who is maybe at the cash register, who engages it with the customer at the sale. Excuse me. There's the person in the stock room who's actually going off to get the thing, may not actually ever talk to the customer, but they're part of the chain. So there's layers of the process. Um, and I think that whichever layer we are in, we don't necessarily see the whole system. And so when you get into a room with a bunch of people to brainstorm something and you say, how many variations of something do you have? And everybody writes it on their Post-it note. In a project we did recently, people came back and we had 256 things that they
Wow.
supposedly supplied to their group. And that was because when you asked people what they did and what the story was and what they got paid for and what their function was, we had 256 things. The reality was that when we sorted everything, they had 3 things. And each thing that they did or offered had multiple roles wrapped around it. And if you took a role out, that thing didn't work. And so rather than having 256 things that they did, they had 3 things that they did, but each one required a team. And so that idea of being able to look at, and it's Roger Martin in his book, I think I'm looking for it there and I'll get it. It's The Design of Business, I think it's called. He has this great little model. It's called a knowledge funnel. And it's in 3 levels. And the top of the level is just chaos. That's the 256 things. The middle of the funnel is the sorting mechanism, which is to say, what's the connective tissue here?
Yeah.
Bottom of the funnel is it spits out and says, this group does 3 things. And I've found that, and that's a typical design method, but I've found that what you're touching on there is if we have the skill to observe, and in doing so, just be able to sort and maybe classify, then that goes such a long way to being able to simplify things and make them more manageable. And I think not just in the workplace, but in an inordinate number of places.
And I think if you could train people to do that, and then you find a way to manage them for the results that come from that, I think you've you've cracked the code.
Well,
Yeah,
you know this, and I we could shatter a couple of what's the metaphor, big, deeply cherished eggs here.
yeah,
Um, we train people to do all sorts of useless stuff.
yeah.
Um, and I won't name I won't name any of them for fear of insulting anybody. But if you've been in a company of medium or large size, half the a big sizable chunk of the training you do, honestly, well, I'll move on from that and just say there's a big difference between training and learning. Um, and if we could teach people to learn, or we could help people learn for themselves. Sorry, I should.
Oh,
That's
well, I'll give you an example of this that happened to me just the other night, and this will prove that this is not relegated to middle managers or to guys with either silver or no hair. It's really for everybody. So I was visiting with some friends, a family. We just finished dinner, and the father and I were having conversation about world events, and we had touched on Chinese domestic policy and had simply referenced the one child policy, and their 10-year-old daughter was sitting between us, and she went into a rant about the one child policy, and I'm watching her. She had nailed it. She said she understood exactly why it was wrong, why it was going to be detrimental to the country. And I turned to her and I said, "How do you know this?" And she said, "I listen." and then I just, we talked some more, and I thought, gosh, this is one of those moments I'm going to remember for a very long time. So 10-year-old listening, learning, and being able to process that so that she has something to say in a very adult conversation.
I think you're triggering something else for me that I like. I have been fortunate enough, we know some. I'm thinking, Richard Merrick and a few of the people we've been lucky enough to meet and get to know. And I'm going to do a shameless, very minor plug here, Ed, for Alan Moore and his book, How to Build and Make, or How to Make and Lead a Business the World Needs. And the reason I mention it is because he leans heavily into things like biomimicry and the fact that actually if we take our process and method hats off for a moment, nature works pretty well. It's structured. One of my things, I'm terrible at math, but I love math. And so I have a friend here that I partner with the whole time. And I when I come up with something, I go to him and I go, hey, Leon, can we explain this in math? Can we account for this in math? And if he says yes, I'm all good about it. And that's one of the things about nature that's always amazing to me is how structured and how organized and how emergent it is. And one of the things that Alan talks about that I love that is in that book is he said, let's embrace it. And by the way, in his case, here's 52 companies that have embraced it and been commercially wildly successful while being, regenerative and sustainable and generally very socially innovative in their approaches. And I think, we go back to that earlier, thing about freedom or listening to a 10-year-old, which is she's hopefully unencumbered with people telling her that that's not how to do it yet. And I find the more and more that we get told that we should follow a particular method, the farther we get from what is actually possible. And that took me a long time. It was something I sensed, but probably wasn't always brave enough to act on. And then a colleague of mine, who's based in Dallas, Fran Willis White, one day said to me in a conversation, method follows intention. If you have an intention, there's any number of methods you can use to get there. And then, as I also learned from somebody else, is, and if you don't have an intention, that's okay. Watch out and see if something emerges. And so I just think the more prescribed and controlled we try to get, which kind of describes your modern corporate infrastructure, the less innovative, the less productive, the less performant, the less engaging, the less inspiring you actually are. And I've seen enough of those situations to know that that's not a hunch, that's actually a fact.
So what we're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're saying is that somehow we've ended up with corporate structures that don't make sense, and don't make sense from the standpoint of how people actually learn and how people work and how leadership actually functions. And for some reason, we've ended up with something different. And in my world, my sense is that people have no clue as to what their structure looks like, and they think they can improve it, but the problem is it's not that it needs improvement. It needs to be replaced, and they don't know what that looks like, because we're talking about microstructures within large macro structures, but we don't even know what the macro structure actually looks like, and that becomes the problem.
Yeah, I agree. I have I have a story coming to mind that I'll say it very quickly, because otherwise it's kind of. I remember sitting in a meeting room with a bunch of leaders. We'd had a big five consulting, or big four is it now, big consulting company with us for 2 years. It hadn't gone particularly well from anybody's perspective, and this was kind of, from the consulting company's perspective, it was the meeting to try and continue, extend their contract. From the leadership's perspective, it was the meeting to pat them on the back and say thank you and good luck. And so when the big report came and landed on the table, I was sitting at the bottom, and I wasn't in a decision maker role, so I pull it down, I start looking through it, and it was really good. And I realized in that moment that there was nobody around the table on our side that understood what was in that report. And it was too late. It was too late. And so in there somewhere, everybody had gotten lost in the mechanics of, the politics or the business goals or the this and that and the other. And the reality was that that company had produced what we needed, but somewhere in the mix it didn't get communicated, or maybe how they had acted, or maybe they tripped over some internal politics. And it, to me, it comes back to in that case, it was biting off too much. Just saying, let's transform this whole organization of over 10,000 people and let's do it all in one go. I mean, that doesn't work, and yet that's one of the big things we see all the time. And it was also that skill, like you said earlier on, of observing, and then what follows observation is trying to make sense of what we've just seen. And again, these aren't skills that we see more of it now, because you'll see it in things like design groups and innovation groups inside companies, but they're still typically in an ivory tower. Whereas every middle manager and everybody that's underneath them is innovating every day. And the people above them are innovating every day. And what I mean by innovation in that sense is there's a classic model, I'm sure you're familiar with, this idea of the 3 horizons of innovation. And the first horizon is what we call the known knowns. The problem is known, the solution is known. So it's all about, how do we make more money? How do we get more effective, more productive? The second horizon is the transformation horizon, is we're going from a situation that is known into one where there are unknowns. We would like to manage that as gently as possible, but we cannot make any guarantees. And so what we used to say is, hey, guess what? If we do a whole lot of transformation work, you can't hold us accountable for things like revenue or productivity or efficiency, because they're all known metrics. Right. And that right there is a huge disconnect straight away, where pretty much every team in a company is held accountable to numbers as metrics. Except maybe sales, right? And in those situations, you kind of go, well, hold on a second. So you're telling me that at least 50% of my work isn't measurable, but you're holding me accountable to it. but in both ways, right? So, and those are the kind of things where you kind of go referring to earlier, as we were saying, the system isn't helping us, the processes aren't helping us,
Yeah. And
and there are ways of untangling them. That's my point.
the third innovation, third
The
level.
third is unknown unknowns. I mean, this is the classic Donald Rumsfeld quote from 20 years ago, right? And this is where, and I've got a whole lot of friends who are designers, so they look at things like foresight and futurism, and just trying to imagine what would it look 3 to 5 years out. We're not going to build any castles over there yet because we don't know whether the ground is solid. But
Right.
what are the indicators? If I might, I'm going to touch on something very random just because you triggered it there. A lot of Horizon 3 innovations about really good storytelling.
Yeah.
One of the little things that's giving me a little bit of hope at the moment, you talked earlier on about being hopeful, so I'd love to hear, your thoughts on that. I like to watch TV, and I'll give an example of having watched Game of Thrones for years, which was great fun and hugely violent, and didn't require a whole lot of deep thinking to sort of follow along. Um, I'm not saying that the violence was fun, but it added to the excitement of watching the show. But where I wanted to go with this is that the follow-on prequel show that they've made is actually a lot more thoughtful and
Yeah.
slower, and focuses the feminine energy this time on problem solving rather than sex and violence. And I think that's interesting. And it's not the only TV show sort of where I've seen this transition take place. I was interested to see the difference between, the zombie story of The Walking Dead versus the zombie story of The Last of Us is very different. And so I'm curious, are we waking up to in our, because I kind of see sometimes that our popular culture is a really good barometer of mood. Just a thought, it's very random, but
Well, I do think there is a cultural shift taking place. I don't think it's at the point where there is labels that can be applied to it, which is a good thing, which means it won't be marginalized. Um, it won't be monetized. It will allow for this cultural shift to emerge over time. And I think that what I'm going out on a limb too, because this is something that I saw and I've seen in organizations, and I came to call it it's a long phrase, and it's really about the culture of where the culture of a company comes from, and we could say that it's also where the culture of a nation would come from. So I talk about the persistent residual culture, a persistent residual culture of values that persists because it resides in the relationships of people. And I see that, and I've seen that in organizations, and I've seen it in large corporations where the people that work there love working there, but they're so disconnected from the senior executive level, the C-suite, that there's almost two companies operating, and 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 the company can continue to function at a high level because of those people in operating within that residual culture of values. And it's almost as if the people at the very top are less relevant than ever before, or maybe not ever before, but they're becoming less relevant because they're just kind of moving things around without it ever landing in a tangible way that actually allows for people to say, okay, now we can work with this and we can take it here or we can take it there. And it seems, that it's an incomplete thought at this point, but I see this as kind of one of the dimensions of what's going on in the world today.
Oh, I like the thought. I'm gonna be thinking about that for a while. What triggered for me as you said that is a question. Two questions is, who is it that we want to be, or what is it that we want to have? And depending on which one of those is leading,
Yeah.
you get very different outcomes. I've been in two situations with companies that were excellent places to work, up to the point where they got activist investors. And
And
And then it all changed. And so, I kind of look at it and go, hey, when we live in a system where activist investment is perfectly legal, economically makes sense, and delivers high yield for that small group of people that came in and decided that they could make a ton of money by disrupting the thing. I'm not going on an anti-shareholder rant here. I'm a shareholder. I want, the companies we invest in to do as well as they possibly can. But I think you've got to hold as well a sense of the social contract in your head, which is to say, I want to succeed and do well and look after my family and be able to buy and have nice things. But ultimately, I want to be able to do it in a way that maybe makes the world slightly better rather than leaves it worse.
yeah, yeah,
So
totally agree. Well, let me ask you one last question, and this is, I think, um, suitable for many people that I know today. So you have gone through a change in focus within your career over the last few years. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about what happened in that transition. You don't have to be really specific in the terms of the companies and anything, but just talk about what you went through and how you ended up where you are today, which seems to be at a really good place. So that transition, that from kind of mid-career transition that a lot of people are going through because of a variety of reasons, COVID being a principal one, but a lot of people said, okay, I've been doing this for 20, 25 years. It's time to make a change. I need to do something different. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think people are very interested in this topic. It's the kind of, other than communication, it's this kind of the singular topic that everyone is interested in hearing about.
yeah, I think and thank you for asking that, because it has been front of mind. I'm going to grab a book here for a second. I'm a book guy, as you know.
All right.
You'll see in a second why. Um, I think one of the biggest things. I mean, I will say, I think I've been fortunate. I've worked for some amazing people over the years. And so there's that. And I was fortunate enough in a lot of it was in hindsight to realize just how good they were. So that helps. But the second thing for me was, I would look back, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, where I was saying, hey, if you're a middle manager, typically you're never given the resources. Now, that can get really frustrating. I mean, you can use all your ingenuity and all your innovative skills, and you still don't have enough to get it done. That can get really irritating. But one of the big things, and this is a word I look for all the time in any situation, is what's the reframe here? What's the reset? If I were to look at this, if I were to turn this sideways and say that negative thing, I'm going to force myself to look for the positive in it. You will find it. There is something there. And the reason I grabbed the book is that part of that journey for me was going from complaining about situations to going, all right, no matter how annoying this situation is, we haven't failed yet. And so the reframe of that is, there's some set of things that we're doing, or how we go about it, or how we build relationships that allows you to get through things that are difficult. And I in the middle of all that, I found this just killer book, which is called How to Make Sense of Any Mess. And it's by Abby Covert, and here's your 7 steps for making sense of any mess. And as you know, when we look through any of those words that are there, they're pretty big words. But what I wanted to get at is, it was that reframe of, like, if we get stuff done in difficult situations, that's actually a positive. Let's try and see what that is. The second thing I became super aware of, and I'm borrowing a phrase here from Fran, who I mentioned earlier. She has a phrase that I love called connecting to cause. And I look at that in sort of 3 steps. And the first connection is connect with yourself. Get to know yourself. Who are you? What inspires you? What drives you? What type of person do you aspire to be? Where are the signals of that? Get a little coaching, find out about yourself. Because when you learn about yourself, you get way better at the second connection, which is finding others that you can connect with. And if you're open-minded, you will learn all sorts of stuff when you connect with others. And that is a real joy. I mean, that's one for me. I don't say that word joy to be sort of cliched or whatever. It is absolutely rocket fuel. When, we've had these conversations and I'm like, as recently as yesterday, you said to me, hey, turn that thing you wrote and just do this and see what it looks like. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's completely different and it's way more powerful. So when you have that comfort in who you are and that ability to connect with others, now you can look at each other and go, what cause do we want to support or pursue or explore? Or what is it in the world that we want to cause? And I have a mindset that whether it's in an organization or in society, we have an abundant world. We are not short of stuff. And we keep throttling it with process and policy and all this stuff that's fixed. I mean, I'm not going to pick any one law, but I hear stuff in the news like, according to such and such a law from 1872. And I'm like, how many years ago was that? What, can we get around to reviewing whether these things are still, valid? And so I just look at that and sort of say, that phrase "connect to cause" is really, really strong for me. And so that has been that journey of saying, and I will share this with you, Ed, and I know this will be familiar to a lot of the people that it might be listening or that you talk to, is it doesn't always pay well. There's a lot of risk associated with it. But do you get up in the morning and feel that, that you're living the life that's there for you to live? Yes. And I think that is a weight off the shoulder every morning. And one other thing just associated with this, which again is why learning is powerful. I read this phenomenal book by Peter Block called Confronting Our Freedom. And one of the things he says is that to be free and to decide that you are making your own choices brings with it anxiety. And anxiety is a sign that you are free and exploring choices. And I love that because every damn day is filled with a degree of anxiety. And that's the challenge. I mean, that's the whole thing, is like, how do I, ease the tension here? Because it means we're moving forward, and who can we do it with? And that's fun. That's fun, no?
Yeah, it really is. And the whole core of my leadership thing is that all leadership begins with personal initiative, and personal initiative is just another way of talking about human agency. And human agency is that ability to make evaluations and say, okay, I'm going to choose this, I'm going to go in this direction. And that may mean, okay, I'm going to leave the company I've worked for 20 years and I'm going to go do something new. And that sometimes we're forced into that. We get fired. I've been fired. Or we go through a loss. I mean, we go through some kind of loss. We lose our business, or our marriage ends, or something like that. And so we can look at that as a negative, or we can look at that, okay, I'm in transition. So where am I going to go? What's my intent? What do I want? And maybe we don't know right away. So I think picking up on a refrain that keeps coming through what you're saying is that we put ourselves in a position to learn. We go read some books, we go talk to people, we listen, we observe, we watch, we kind of assess what's going on. What do we see? What is it I like? What is it I don't like? All of that process is going on, and somehow an opportunity will show up at your doorstep, and you'll say, "Oh, so this is what I'm supposed to go do."
If I might, I love what you're saying there, and a thought that triggered for me. And again, it's something you had said to me yesterday in the comment on the article. Because I had worked in technology for so long, and there was only 5 or 6 vendors that competed with us. It was very easy to have a sort of an absolute view of the world. Our thing is the best because this is the best way to do it because. And so it took me a couple of years to get my head around that actually in life there is no best way. There are ways. And it's the one that works for you that is the best way. And where I'm going with this is that, and you raised it yesterday, there are, however, things that are timeless and unconditional. And they're worth finding. And they're out there and we know them. and just listen to them. That's the thing, I think.
Well, John, this has been great. I know we could go on for another couple of hours, and I think we'll come back and we'll talk some more about these things. I'd like to talk more about machine learning and AI. I need to learn some more about that, but you've got some, and I have a couple of people who are going to be interviewed here on our podcast who are experts in this, and so I will. One of the things I'm doing here is trying to learn from people who I think are smart and are has something to say, and I want to share that with other people. And so I'm grateful for your being here. And
And if I right and 100% right back at you, and I left this little piece to the end because it's such a fun. I was going to say coincidence, and then I've got lots of friends who say there are no coincidences. So I mentioned a couple of books throughout the chat. This was the book that got me going, which was Generalist by Kenneth and Richard.
It's a great book.
Come to find out you're in this book, which I started to read in 2016.
And I've already interviewed Kenneth Michelson, who's the co-author, and I'm interviewing Richard Martin, who's the other co-author, fairly soon. I think it's next week, maybe it's this week. And so,
well, I'll give that a shameless plug. I think this is a book everybody should read, especially if you're a middle manager. It's just, but in like, it's a fantastic book.
And if you heard the podcast I did with Kenneth, he will say that every generalist needs to be a specialist in some area. So it's not that we're just general and kind of without focus. It's really that we have a specific focus. I mean, for me, I'm a generalist, a neo generalist, but my focus is leadership and in particular transition and culture, and the culture and the structures of things. These are specialty areas that I focus on because it just seems to be the thing which I have some facility for understanding. That comes back to that observational thing. You observe and you see, what you can see and describe to someone who can't see it. That's an indication that you have a strength in some way that could be beneficial to some other people. Whether it's beneficial in your work, that's another story, but it still can be beneficial to people. And I think increasingly, what we'll find is that when we are able to identify how we can be beneficial to people who we're in relationship with, then we will see everything else kind of come into focus and everything else begin to work for us. But kind of focusing on those relationships, I think, is really how we make all of this kind of work for us.
Absolutely.
All right.
Ed, thank you so much. It's real fun chatting with you.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. Please subscribe and hit the like button, and even more, please offer a comment or a question. We'd love to be in conversation with you. I can tell you that the times that I do that on Substack with other Substack writers produces really interesting conversations, just like what John and I have had today. So if you want to be a part of something like that, where you are finding that you have a way to articulate what you're thinking and feeling, then this is a place to begin. And we would love to be in conversation with you. So thank you. And we'll see you next time. And John, we'll see you again real soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, Ed.
And thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.